This is part one of a multi-part series that I'm working on to investigate all of the individuals and institutions involved in the miscarriage of justice, which led an innocent woman to be imprisoned for the rest of her life for murders she didn't commit. This first part is about the woman herself, Lucy Letby. After what you hear, if you can still believe that this woman is capable of murder, I don't know what to tell you. Lucy Letby was born on January 4th, 1990, in Hereford, England, to parents who adored her and who established a very close relationship with her, which lasted all through her life and still exists, I would presume. Lucy was born prematurely and she spent time on a neonatal unit. And because of her experience there and because of the stories her parents told her about the way the nurses cared for her, she developed a lifelong goal to become a neonatal nurse herself. And she held on to that dream and made it come true. She was, by all accounts, a pretty shy person, pretty shy child, pretty shy adult. She was young for her age, had stuffed animals on her bed when she was in her 20s. Not a judgment, just a statement about the type of person she was. Very sweet, very loving, very innocent. She had artwork on her walls that said, "Leave sparkles wherever you go." She liked going dancing with her friends and clubbing with her friends. She loved movies. She had many friends who she liked to travel with and spend time with. She was quirky. She had a quirky sense of humor. She was kind and caring and quiet due to her shyness. She was conscientious. She was devoted and could be counted on, and was an all around wonderful person and friend, according to every person who knew her well. There has never been an account of Lucy Letby but one that is full of love and admiration, except for on the part of those who had other intentions in mind, namely their own advancement and their own self protection. She became a nurse after she attended the University of Chester in Chester, England. She internshipped at the Countess of Chester Hospital and at the Liverpool Women's Hospital. And she internshipped at the Countess of Chester Hospital with a friend who later said that the environment was rather toxic, that because of Lucy's shyness, many of the people who were full-time workers on the ward, nurses and doctors, kind of ganged up on her or didn't respect her very much because of her shyness and didn't accept either of them into their circle. And in fact, said she didn't understand why, after they both graduated, Lucy would still want to work at the hospital. But in fact, Lucy did, perhaps because Lucy saw that the hospital needed good nursing staff and she knew herself to be a good nurse and she knew she wanted to add her skills to a unit that needed them. So she stayed on after she graduated. She had to go through an assessment to be able to become a full-time nurse. And the first person who ran her assessment, which basically means that they follow you around and watch you do your work and make sure that you're fit for purpose. The first person to do that for her was Nikki Lightfoot. And again, by all accounts, Nikki Lightfoot was an overwhelming personality, was an intense personality. And for somebody of Lucy's ilk, which was very quiet and reserved, almost to the point of anxiety until she got to know you, Nikki Lightfoot was overwhelming to her. And she had a hard time being able to do her job well because she was afraid of Nikki Lightfoot. And so as a result, she was more quiet, appeared to be more anxious, and Nikki misunderstood who Lucy was because of the fear and failed her in her first assessment, saying that she seemed cold, that she seemed too cold for somebody who was going to be a child's nurse, which to me, it seems ignorant to suggest that there's one personality that can be a child's nurse, but that's just my opinion. So anyway, Lucy went to her friend, Sarah Jane Murphy, who also worked at the hospital, and explained the situation, said she wasn't comfortable with Nikki Lightfoot, asked for another chance, and asked to go with Sarah Jane, to have Sarah Jane be her assessor. And Sarah Jane decided that she wouldn't force Lucy to go through another experience with Nikki Lightfoot, but that she felt Lucy needed to be exposed to other personalities just to make sure she was able to work with them. So Lucy was sent to someone else. I think it was Anita Hargreaves, but I'm not positive of that. And she was passed. She passed her assessment because she felt safer and more comfortable. She was an extraordinarily young woman, maybe even slightly lacking in confidence because of her shyness. And she needed kindness in a moment of struggle, and she was not given it at first. And then when she was, she aced her assessment. That assessment is always used against her. And so I felt it important to mention why that seems to have happened and how that could be explained. I'll tell a personal story about myself. I'm not a shy person at all. I can be quiet sometimes, but I'm not shy. But if I'm very, very uncomfortable around somebody, I do become shy. I seem like an entirely different person because I become closed up and protective of myself. It happened at a particular point in my life when I was about 12 years old, in fact. I was around people who I didn't feel safe around for whatever reason. It wasn't their fault. And I was completely quiet. I never said a word around these people. So they had this view of me of being quiet to the point of being weird almost. And I knew that wasn't who I was, but I just couldn't help it. I was uncomfortable around them. And this sounds to me like what Lucy's experience was. She was scared. Her future career was on the line. She cared very much. She had a lifelong dream of doing this work. Here was her chance, her assessment, and this person scared her. So she had all of these things going against her, which increased her anxiety and led to her failing, when really it sounds to me like her assessor just wasn't a very compassionate, gentle person. And it wasn't Lucy's fault because, in fact, Lucy did pass the assessment and became one of the best nurses on the ward. After she passed the assessment, she got more intensive care training and became one of the most competent nurses on the ward and was assigned to care for the sickest babies on the ward. Arian Powell, who was the ward manager, said that Lucy was one of her favorite nurses, was second to none, was meticulous, clever, exceptional, and very professional. Other nurses on the ward said she was compassionate toward the babies and very capable and a delight. I quote. She would work overtime to help the understaffed unit and would offer her services even when she wasn't on duty. Even if she was out, for instance, at a salsa class, which she liked to do in her spare time with her friends, and she got a call from someone on the unit saying they needed help with something that only she knew how to do, she would drop everything and go and help. This was the kind of person she was. She cared deeply about the parents who lost children in the ward. She'd go above and beyond for them. She would encompass the hardest parts of the job, meaning when a parent lost a child, she would bring the box of things that belonged to the child. She would help them grieve. She would help them wash the children. She would do whatever she could to bring them comfort. She would send them cards afterwards, greeting cards, just to show she cared and that she loved them. She would check on them to make sure that they were doing okay months down the line because she cared about their well-being because they became close during the time that the babies were on the unit. She cared for the handover sheets that she inadvertently took home, which is a common thing that happens with most nurses. Handover sheets are sheets that are handed over between shifts. One nurse who has been on shift will give to the nurse who is taking over all of the situation of what happened on her shift so that the incoming nurse can know what's happening. And often, because they're so busy, particularly on a unit like Lucy's, they'll just shove the handover sheets in their pockets and forget about them and bring them home. But because they're semi-confidential, they can't really throw them out, but they don't really want to bring them back to work because they weren't really supposed to bring them home. So they're kind of they're caught between a rock and a hard place. So Lucy, rather than just doing what most people would do, which is either throw them out at home or bring them into the hospital and throw them out there, she kept them because she wanted to figure out what to do with them, because she wanted to be responsible with these pieces of information that belonged to people that were not her. She cared. She cared. She cared so much for the babies on her ward that she took the many issues that her unit was facing to the management of the hospital, hoping that those issues could be addressed. And those issues were many. There were drainage and sewage problems on her unit, which led to toilets and sinks backing up and sewage leaking from the ceiling, which was causing pseudomonas in the infants on the ward, causing infection and sepsis. There was incompetent medical care being given by the doctors. Many, many stories of doctors making mistakes that led to the deaths of babies and making bad decisions and not really knowing what they were doing, but still handling the sickest of babies. And she was concerned. So she took these issues to hospital management, knowing that whistleblowing was a dangerous thing to do in a hospital setting, but also knowing that the babies needed somebody to advocate for them. And doing this, rather than leading to what she hoped it would, which was a better unit, led to this sweet, shy, innocent, humble, capable woman of being targeted by the doctors on the unit whose egos were pricked by her care and who were afraid that their incompetency would lead to the unit being downgraded, which, by the way, it was downgraded because it needed to be. But instead of focusing on their own limitations and focusing on the ways that the hospital was failing, they focused on her. And they accused her of being the cause of the deaths on the unit, when in fact the causes were right in front of them. They knew that. They just wanted to scare her and get rid of her because she was a danger to them, because she was calling them out on their mistakes. They didn't realize it was going to lead to where it led. They didn't know that she was going to eventually be arrested and convicted of the murder of 7 babies and the attempted murder of 7 more. They just wanted her out of their way. It's not what happened. What happened was much worse. And they continued the charade. So this isn't to let them off the hook, but just to say that they knew from the beginning that Lucy Letby was not a murderer. They just allowed the narrative to take over their brains, and Lucy is now in prison for the rest of her life for something she did not do. An innocent, good person spending her life in prison. It's not a coincidence that when these doctors first started to attack Lucy, that the hospital took her side and took her side for most of the event. For years, they insisted that Lucy was a good nurse and had done nothing wrong. And they finally did an internal review to make sure that they were correct. And the internal review, which involved a panel of people, found that there was no malfeasance in the hospital, that Lucy Letby was fine, a wonderful nurse, and should be allowed back on the unit. But the doctors didn't like that, and so they kept pushing and pushing and pushing. And the hospital management became afraid that if Lucy came back on the ward, they would bully her, which this is where their mistakes began, because they should have said, look, either you go to the police or you stop this right now, because you can't be bullying an innocent person. But they didn't dare to do that. They were afraid of doing that. And there are reasons for that, which I'll go into in other videos, and which many other people have gone into in their videos as well. So after she was found innocent, the doctors, Dr. Stephen Breary and Dr. Ravi Jairam, continued to push to get her out of the ward, and eventually to get the hospital to go to the police, which the hospital did go to the police in Chester. And the Chester Constabulary looked into the hospital to make sure there was no malfeasance, and didn't find any malfeasance. And then because the doctors, Dr. Stephen Breary and Dr. Ravi Jairam, wanted her completely gone and were afraid she was going to come back, they went to the police themselves, now that it was safe, now that the hospital had gone and they didn't have to deal with being a whistleblower. Which, let me just say about whistleblowing, there are certain definitions that people stick to. Being a whistleblower means that you go to an outside agency to whistleblow your hospital. Lucy never did that. She didn't go to an outside agency. So many would say she was not a whistleblower, but I disagree. I think you're a whistleblower if you go to the management of your job and say that there's a problem on the floor that you work on. I think that's whistleblowing. What Ravi Jayram and Stephen Breary didn't dare to do was go to an outside agency on their own because they didn't want to be real whistleblowers and then get in trouble with the hospital. So when the hospital finally went to the police and the police found that there was no malfeasance, Breary and Jayram decided to go to the police themselves and in a very short time, about an hour, convinced the police that there was murder and that Lucy Letby was the culprit. And so a long campaign was pushed against her and led to her eventual imprisonment and conviction. And I challenge you to listen to the truth of Lucy's life and who she was and what she represented and what people said about her, and to still believe that she is a serial murderer when there is so much evidence and so much proof that points to the opposite, when there are real medical experts who have come forward to defend her, which is dangerous for medical experts to take the part of somebody who has been convicted of serial murder. And yet they did. Many, many medical experts have come forward to defend her and to help her to get exonerated. So rather than to having a knee-jerk reaction to what the media tells us, it's important to investigate the truth behind a story and to not immediately believe what we're told by the media. Lucy Letby is an innocent woman and must be exonerated for the sake of humanity, for the sake of her, for the sake of the parents who lost their babies so that they know the truth and so that an innocent woman hasn't been imprisoned because of the death of their children, but then also for the sake of all of us so that we can take a step forward, so that we can expand, so that we can choose beyond the witch hunt, and so that those who perpetrated this horrible nightmare upon Lucy are held accountable. And hopefully, at the end, there will be a clear picture of who is on the right side and who is on the wrong side. Not just the right side of justice, but the right side of history and of love.